transition in our service on the second Sunday of every month. For those of you who haven't been here, we have a time called This Is My Story, where we are blessed to hear the testimony of how God has been working in one of our members' lives. And so this morning, Mr. Aaron Coriff is going to share with us his story.
Good morning, Grace Life. My name is Aaron Coriff, and I'm here to share a snapshot of my testimony with you. I'm married to a beautiful woman named Jessica, and together we work as ambassadors to two boys, Emerson, who's 6, and Anderson, who's 6 months. I'm a product of Volusia County Schools. I grew up in Deltona, and now I work in Volusia County School as a PE teacher. I'd like to begin with some scripture from Matthew 5, verses 21 through 22. You have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. Moving down to verses 27 through 28. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I am a liar, a cheater, and a killer. In 2008, my parents separated and divorced after 21 years of marriage. The brokenness of the world and sinful hearts created pain, anger, and suffering in my family. That's still, the effects of which can still be seen today. A few years ago, Jessica and I were going through a very extremely difficult time, very similar to what my parents went through. And it culminated in an afternoon where I was driving around in my truck, not knowing what to do or where to go. We were on the brink of divorce. I had neglected my wife, and selfishly, I sought out my own needs. I had sought out my own needs before her own. Not knowing what to do, this is awesome. Not knowing what to do or where to go, I turned to the passenger seat, and in it lay my Bible. From the previous Sunday, there was a pamphlet, a Grace Life handout. I didn't know what I was doing. I flip open my Bible, I look at the handout, and on it is a name, Brent Carnathan, and his number. Okay, I'll call the number. Brent and I had maybe passed by each other maybe a couple of times at Grace Life, said hello, how you doing, that sort of stuff. But I just felt like God was leading me to call him. He answered, and I just emotionally unloaded on him. Poor guy, he was probably like, coming home from work, he's like, oh, who's this number? And then all of a sudden, I was sobbing through details of all that our marriage had experienced and gone through up to that point, sharing with him what a mess it had become. We met many times to talk in person, but during that first meeting, I remember him sitting back after I shared with him like an hour of just details, and it just was not looking good. And I expected to see his reaction of like shock or dismay or sadness. And I just remember he sat back and he kind of smirked. And I'm like, were you not listening? I remember he spoke after listening about my marriage with hope and life. something that I didn't see myself. Fast forward a few months through some of the most difficult conversations I've ever had with Jessica, and I began to recognize the reconciliation and the restoration that only Jesus in his grace and mercy can provide. The kind that Brent had recognized in that moment when he was smirking, because he knew how faithful God was, how faithful God is. The kind that shatters the chains of generational sin. During our recovery, a book titled Shattered Dreams by Larry Crabb was shared with me. And that helped me better understand why God not only allows, but uses pain and suffering to show us that in the midst of shattered dreams, we see in him the only and overflowingly sufficient answer to our soul's deepest cry. It took a year of marriage counseling, prayer, together and apart, wrestling with God, and support from family and friends, a Grace Life community that surrounded us, prayed for us, to restore and reconcile our marriage. We just celebrated 9 years of marriage in November. And my story, thank you, and my story is that I was a liar, a cheater, and a killer. But now I am seen through the lens of Christ as a truth seeker, a preserver, and an image bearer. And a barrel rider for Tom, right, Tommy? I'd like to close with a quote from Tim Keller in his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. He says this: "The great theme of the Bible itself is how God brings fullness of joy, not just despite, but through suffering, as Jesus saved us, not in spite of, but because of what he endured on the cross." Thank you.